The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the bailiff called the next case. And all eyes turned toward the door where a young black teenager stepped forward with his mother by his side. His clothes were simple, his hands trembled just slightly, but his eyes carried a fire most people in that room didn't recognize yet. The judge leaned back in his chair, smirking, as if the very sight of a teenager in his courtroom was entertainment, not justice. "Son," the judge scoffed loudly enough for the crowd to hear, "this isn't a playground. You don't belong here. Let the real lawyers handle this." The courtroom chuckled, heads shaking in disbelief, and even the opposing attorney smirked at the audacity of a boy daring to stand in a place meant for seasoned professionals. But behind that ridicule, no one noticed the way the boy's mother clenched her fists, fighting back tears, or the way he straightened his shoulders as if he had carried weight like this all his life. They didn't know that this boy wasn't just standing in for a lawyer. He had studied every page of case law, memorized every detail, and prepared for this moment more fiercely than anyone in that courtroom could imagine. They didn't know that what looked like weakness was actually strategy, and that his silence carried more power than their mockery. Yet still, the humiliation cut deep. His skin color, his youth, his very presence in that courtroom made him an easy target for a system built to doubt him before he even spoke a word. The judge's gavel tapped with mock impatience. But in that pause before the first word was spoken hung a storm. A question no one dared to ask out loud. What happens when the one you underestimate the most turns out to be the one who knows the law better than everyone else in the room? And when he finally opened his mouth, the truth would shake not just the courtroom, but the very foundations of power, prejudice, and justice itself. Marcus Johnson wasn't like most kids his age. At just 17, while other teenagers worried about basketball games, prom dates, or scrolling endlessly on their phones, Marcus spent his nights hunched over old law books, stacked like towers around his desk. His bedroom walls weren't filled with posters of rappers, athletes, or movie stars, no. Marcus had handwritten notes taped everywhere, quotes from civil rights leaders, passages of court rulings, and timelines of historic cases that had shaped his people's lives all stared back at him every morning when he woke. To some, he looked like an obsessed kid, but to Marcus, this was survival. He lived in a neighborhood where police sirens were louder than lullabies, where courtrooms were a place his friends' names appeared on dockets more often than report cards. From the time he was little, Marcus watched his mother struggle to pay rent, to fight off eviction notices, to keep food on the table, while also protecting him from the harsh truth. The system wasn't built to see them win. But Marcus noticed. He always noticed. He remembered the day when he was just 12, standing quietly in the back of a courthouse, as his mother pleaded with a judge about a wrongful eviction. The landlord's lawyer spoke with polished arrogance, while his mother stumbled over her words, voice trembling from exhaustion. The judge barely glanced at her, signing away their apartment with the flick of a pen. Marcus never forgot the sting of that moment, the way his mother's shoulders slumped, the way she whispered, "I'm sorry, baby," even though she had done nothing wrong. That day planted a fire in him. If no one was going to speak for people like his mom, then one day, he would. Fast forward 5 years, and Marcus had become something of a quiet legend in his community. Neighbors said he had a gift, the way he could read complicated legal documents and explain them in plain, everyday language. Whenever someone got a ticket they couldn't afford, or when an elderly couple received confusing paperwork about losing their home, they came to Marcus. He wasn't a lawyer at least not yet, but he had the mind of one. He would sit at their kitchen tables, flipping through forms, highlighting sections, and saying with calm authority, "This is what they're trying to do, and this is what the law really says." For families who felt invisible, Marcus made them feel heard. For his mother, it was proof her son wasn't ordinary, he was destined for something bigger. But destiny rarely comes without a storm. The storm began on a Tuesday afternoon, when Marcus's uncle, James, a bus driver for the city, was arrested after a confrontation with a passenger turned ugly. The official story painted James as violent, unruly, and disrespectful. But Marcus knew better. His uncle was strict but kind, a man who had worked 20 years without so much as a warning on his record. What the reports didn't say was that the passenger had taunted James with racist slurs for miles, mocking his skin, his accent, his very existence, until finally James defended himself. The system, however, didn't care about the truth. They cared about labels, and James, a black working man, was already guilty in their eyes. When the case hit court, Marcus couldn't stand by. His mother begged him not to get involved, afraid he'd get swallowed by the same machine that chewed up countless young black men. But Marcus felt something deeper, an obligation. He had spent years preparing for this without realizing it. Every late night reading case law, every memory of injustice, every page he had highlighted, all led to this moment. "Mum," he told her, his voice steady despite the fear in her eyes, "if I don't stand up for Uncle James, then who will? They already think we don't belong in that courtroom. Maybe it's time they see we do." So Marcus walked into the courthouse, his head high but his stomach in knots. He wasn't licensed, he wasn't supposed to stand where lawyers stood, but he knew the law inside out. He knew he could argue the truth better than anyone who was being paid to bury it. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was how the system would react. Would the judge laugh him out of the room? Would the attorneys crush him before he got a chance to speak? Would his uncle's fate be sealed before Marcus could even open his mouth? That was the setup. A teenager, armed with nothing but knowledge, courage, and the weight of his family's name, stepping into the lion's den of justice. What he didn't realize yet was that this wasn't just about saving his uncle. This was about exposing a deeper sickness, one that lived in the cracks of the justice system itself. And as Marcus took his seat at the defendant's table, the whispers began. The judge sneered. The opposing attorney smirked. The audience laughed under their breath. Everyone in that courtroom thought they already knew how this story would end. But Marcus was just getting started. The wooden doors of the courtroom groaned as they opened, and Marcus stepped inside, his palms slick with sweat. He wasn't supposed to be here, not really, but every nerve in his body told him he belonged. Yet the room itself disagreed. From the moment he walked in, eyes followed him, sizing him up, dismissing him, mocking him. To the gallery of onlookers, he was just a kid in an oversized suit borrowed from his uncle's closet. To the attorneys at the prosecution table, he was a laughable distraction. And to the judge, a gray-haired man with a permanent scowl etched into his face. Marcus was nothing more than a nuisance, an intruder in a world reserved for real lawyers. The trial began, and from the start, the deck was stacked. The prosecutor, a smug man in a sharp navy suit, spoke with performative confidence, painting Marcus's uncle as a violent, dangerous driver who had snapped on an innocent passenger. He twisted the story, skipping over the racial slurs, skipping over the humiliation James had endured. Instead, he leaned into every stereotype, an angry black man losing control. The jury, most of them older, white, and stone-faced, nodded along, as if the truth didn't matter. Marcus clenched his fists under the table, rage boiling inside him, but he stayed quiet. For now, when it was his turn to speak, Marcus rose slowly. His voice trembled at first, but only for a moment. He began not with laws or precedents, but with truth. He described the years his uncle had spent driving that same bus route. The way he knew every passenger by name. The way kids called him Uncle James because he kept them safe after school. Marcus painted a picture so vivid that for a fleeting second, the courtroom seemed to shift. But before he could continue, the judge leaned forward, his lips curling. "Young man," the judge interrupted, his tone dripping with condescension. "This is not a classroom debate. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further." The gallery chuckled. The prosecutor smirked. Marcus's ears burned, but he stood his ground. "With all due respect, Your Honor," he said, forcing his voice steady, "the truth deserves to be heard. My uncle deserves to be heard." The room stiffened. No one talked back to Judge Whitaker, not lawyers twice Marcus's age, not even seasoned professionals. And yet, this boy did. From that moment, every step forward felt like pushing against a wall that refused to budge. The prosecutor objected to almost every word Marcus said. The judge sustained nearly every objection. Witnesses who had once promised to speak honestly now faltered, intimidated by the hostile courtroom, and in the gallery, murmurs grew louder, whispers, even outright laughter at the sight of a teenager daring to play lawyer. But Marcus kept fighting. He pointed out contradictions in the passenger's story, exposing details the prosecutor conveniently skipped. He showed how the timeline didn't add up, how security footage told a different tale than the one the prosecution spun. Slowly, cracks began to form in the narrative. A few jurors leaned forward, curious now, unsure. For the first time, doubt lingered in the air. That was when the prosecution struck harder. They produced a surprise witness, a middle-aged woman, who claimed she had been on the bus that day. She testified that James had snapped without reason, that she felt threatened by his presence. Marcus knew instantly what this was, a performance carefully staged to play into every bias the jury already carried. And it worked. Gasps filled the courtroom. The prosecutor smiled as if victory was already in his hands. Marcus's heart pounded. He had no warning, no time to prepare for this. And yet, he remembered something, a report buried deep in the case file. That same woman had once filed a complaint against another black driver years ago, a complaint that was later proven false. Marcus brought it up, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. The courtroom erupted. The judge slammed his gavel, shouting for order. The woman stammered, her face flushing, her story crumbling. For a brief shining moment, Marcus felt momentum shift. He wasn't just defending his uncle anymore, he was exposing the system, tearing away its polished mask. But just as quickly, the walls closed in again. Judge Whitaker leaned back, eyes narrowing, and said in a cold, measured voice, "Enough. This circus has gone on long enough. If this boy wants to play lawyer, then he better be prepared for what happens next." The tension was suffocating. The jury looked unsettled. The prosecutor's smile faded, and Marcus's chest heaving, his mind racing, knew one thing for certain. The battle had only just begun. The gavel slammed down so hard it echoed like thunder through the courtroom. Judge Whitaker's face was crimson now, every wrinkle tightened with rage. "Order! Order in this court!" he barked, but his voice carried more venom than authority. His eyes locked on Marcus, and for a moment, the room fell into a suffocating silence. It wasn't the silence of respect, it was the silence of something uglier. The kind where people waited to see how far a man of power would go. When his control was challenged by a boy he thought beneath him. Marcus stood frozen, his chest rising and falling, the weight of 100 eyes crushing him. He had just dismantled the prosecution's star witness. He had shown the cracks, exposed the lies. But instead of being applauded, he was treated like an enemy who had broken some unspoken rule. The truth didn't matter when spoken by someone like him. The judge leaned forward. His voice, low but dripping with disdain, filled every corner of the room. "You think you're clever, boy? You think you can march into my courtroom, pretend to be a lawyer, and make a mockery of these proceedings?" The word boy cut through Marcus like a blade. He wasn't surprised by it, he'd heard it too many times before, but here, in front of a jury, in front of strangers who would decide his uncle's fate, it stung worse than ever. The gallery murmured. Some smirked. A few whispered the word, under their breath, as if testing how it felt on their own tongues. Marcus swallowed hard, fighting to steady his voice. "I'm not here to mock anything, Your Honor. I'm here because my uncle deserves the truth. He deserves fairness. Fairness." The judge slammed the gavel again, louder this time, as though daring the walls themselves to challenge him. "There is no fairness when a child parades around pretending to know the law. You have wasted this court's time. Sit down before I hold you in contempt." The prosecutor was grinning now, savoring every second. To him, this wasn't just about winning the case, it was about watching Marcus squirm, about watching the system devour him whole. Marcus's knees trembled. He could sit down. He could let this system crush him the way it had crushed countless others. But then his eyes caught his uncle's, James's weathered, tired eyes, filled not with defeat, but with something else, trust. The kind of trust that said, don't give up, not now, not when it matters most. So Marcus stood taller, his voice, though shaking, cut through the silence. With all due respect, Your Honor, if fighting for the truth is a waste of time, then maybe this courtroom isn't about justice at all. Gasps erupted. Someone in the gallery whispered, did he just? The jury shifted uneasily. The prosecutor leaped to his feet. Objection, he's out of line. But the judge didn't shout back immediately. No, this time he leaned back, his lips curling into a thin, cold smile. And then he said the words that made Marcus's blood run cold. You people are always playing the victim, always crying racism, always blaming the system. Maybe if you taught your uncle some respect, we wouldn't be here at all. The room froze. No one breathed. The mask had slipped, and the ugliness beneath it was laid bare. The judge had said it out loud, the prejudice everyone felt but no one had dared to name. And now, it hung in the air like poison. Marcus's vision blurred with fury. His fists clenched so tightly his nails dug into his skin. He wanted to scream, to rage, to tear down the very walls that boxed him in. But instead, he locked eyes with the jury. He spoke, not to the judge, not to the prosecutor, but to them. You heard him, Marcus said, his voice raw, trembling with both pain and defiance. This isn't just about my uncle anymore. This is about whether you'll let hate decide what justice looks like. Look at him. Look at me. Is this what justice is supposed to be? For the first time, the jury looked unsettled not by Marcus, but by the system itself. The tension was unbearable, thick enough to choke on. The judge's face twisted with rage, his hand gripping the gavel so hard his knuckles turned white. And then he raised it high. That's enough. One more word and you'll regret ever stepping foot in this courtroom. Marcus's heart pounded, his voice echoing in his own head. Louder than the gavel, louder than the fear. Say it. Say it now. Don't let them silence you. He opened his mouth, and the screen fades to black. And that's where Marcus's story leaves us, not just with a verdict, but with a question. If a teenager with nothing but courage and truth could stand up in the face of hate, then what excuse do we have to stay silent? Racism doesn't always wear a robe or sit behind a bench. Sometimes it shows up in our schools, our neighborhoods, our workplaces, and even in the small moments where silence feels easier than speaking up. So I want to leave you with this. When you see injustice, will you walk away, or will you raise your voice like Marcus did? Because every voice matters. Every choice matters. Change doesn't come from one courtroom victory, it comes from all of us refusing to look away.